Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Dragon Watching, an introduction to dragonflies and damselflies of Loudoun County. Thank you for your interest, and thank you to the library and to the Master Gardeners for hosting this event. Oh, and I'm already having trouble. Wait a minute. There we go. Yay. All right, first let me tell you a little bit about myself. First thing you should know is that I am not a biologist. I am to dragonflies what a bird watcher is to birds. That said, I started dating a biologist back in 2016 and joined him on his hobby of going out and photographing wildlife. And he and I have been doing that together ever since. We pretty quickly discovered after we started doing that if we could post our pictures to iNaturalist.org, a website that's dedicated to tracking biodiversity on the planet, and that gave us a little boost to keep going, feeling like we were contributing to science. And then after that, I discovered Odonata Central. Odonata is the scientific term that includes both dragonflies and damselflies. And the term odonate is more common speak for that. So you'll hear me saying that as we move along. Anyway, that's a site for tracking not just individual sightings of dragonflies, but also counts and things like that. So I'm fairly active on that site. I participated in the 2023 Reston Dragonfly Count, and I'm eager to share my enthusiasm with you and hope that you'll get some interest in getting out there and paying maybe a little more attention to what's around us. As an outline of the presentation tonight, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the biology of dragonflies. And then I'll dive into the different categories of dragonflies and the local species. And along the way, I'll talk about the life cycle. I'm not going to put that out front. I'm going to try to get to the actual dragonflies themselves first. Then give you some resources for learning more about them and a list of the places in Loudoun County where you can find them. So what is it about dragonflies that at least I think is so interesting and wonderful? Well, one thing that isn't on this list is if it were a choice between bird watching and dragon watching, if you're going to watch birds, you got to get up really early in the morning. Dragonflies, not so much. They don't really start moving around until about 9 a.m. So, and they peak even a little bit after that. So that fits in with my schedule a bit more. Also, though, they're pretty fascinating in their own right. They've been around since before the dinosaurs. Their precursors were here 250 million years ago. There's evidence of them in the fossil records with wingspans that are 28 inches across. So that part's pretty cool. Additionally, they're the most successful hunters on the planet. If they decide to chase something, they catch it 95% of the time. And we're going to go into a few of the reasons why they're such good, or how it is that they are such good hunters. And the health of the wetlands in the area, I think we all have come to learn that that's really important for our environment and our ecology. And one really great way to monitor that is by keeping track of the dragonfly populations. Their larvae grow up in the water, and they lay their eggs in the water, so they really need clean water to survive. And so that if their populations start to decline, that would give a clue to us that things are going wrong. As gardeners, you should be interested when they show up in your garden. Yes, they'll eat the occasional pollinator, but they also eat mosquitoes and gnats and cucumber beetles and pretty much just about anything they can catch. As far as mosquitoes go, a single dragonfly can eat somewhere between 80 and 300 mosquitoes in a day. So they are our friends. And they're pretty easy to observe and photograph because, look, even I can do it. All right, I wanted to review the basic anatomy of dragonflies a little bit, and odonates in general, but damselflies as well. If you go back to your early biology in probably grade school, They are insects, so they have three body parts: a head, a thorax where the legs and the wings are attached, an abdomen, and then at the end of the abdomen they have appendages called the cerci. The male dragonflies use those to hold on to the females during mating and while she's depositing her eggs around. They also have 6 legs. Unfortunately, this picture doesn't really show that because the front legs are tucked up behind the neck. You can just see the tips of the feet there. And if you'll notice, the legs are covered in little spines. That's because they don't use their legs really to walk. Why would you walk if you had incredible wings like that, right? They use them to capture their prey, and those little spines are part of how they hold on to them. And some of them have bigger ones. The bigger they are, probably the better they are at catching things and holding on to bigger prey. Their wings are absolutely astounding. They have veining throughout them that really gives them a lot of strength. They can move each wing independently. That gives them great maneuverability, so they can fly in every direction. They can also fly at really high speeds. They can do a burst of speed that's up to 34 miles per hour. To keep their wings from oscillating so badly that they go out of control, at the end of each wing, there's a little stigma. On this spangled skimmer, those are white. They're different colors for different dragonflies. But they're there to provide a touch of weight at the end of the wing that keeps it from oscillating badly. So it's all part of the engineering that allows them to fly so well. The other part that makes them awesome hunters is their eyesight. If you look closely at the eyes on this great blue skimmer, if it's coming through well enough for you at the top of the eyes, you can see little facets. The eyes being the aqua organs there on the head. Each eye has 30,000 lenses in it. Some of them are specialized for different types of light. The ones at the top generally for looking at the sky. Our eyes have 3 proteins for sensing colors. We can see red, blue, and green, and every color that we see is a combination of those one way or another. Dragonflies see much more than that. It's hard for me I can't really tell you definitively how many proteins they have for that because every article I read says something different. But they can see into the ultraviolet, and the way that they perceive the world between all those little facets, giving them a compound picture. They can see above them and behind them and to the sides all at the same time. It's hard for us to imagine really how they see the world. They're also quite astounding at translating what they see to action, because another part of what makes them really great hunters is they don't just chase something and run it down. They actually compute where they're going to be based on their current flight and fly to there instead. And there are researchers who are very interested in how they manage to do that, with thoughts on, better guided missiles and actually even faster computers if they can figure out how they're computing that so fast. The lower half of the face consists essentially of mouth. As I said, I'll be using the term odonate a lot. That comes from the Greek for tooth. And you can see where that comes from if you look. This is a female great blue skimmer, and you look at that mouth that she's got. There's kind of a big buck tooth at the top. I'm pretty sure that's where that comes from. And dragonflies and damselflies are then a suborder under the order of Odonata in the biological taxonomy. Okay, so what's the difference between the two? Dragonflies in general are stouter than damselflies to start with. They're generally more massive as well. Their wings are very, very different. Dragonflies, the hind wing is broader than the front wing. And at rest, they tend to go out to the sides. For damselflies, their wings are much finer and of equal length, and they generally, and again, well, This is nature. There's an exception to everything, but they fold them along their backs, along the abdomen there. Dragonflies also have eyes that wrap around their heads and take up a great part of the area of the head. Damselflies have smaller eyes that are out on protuberances on the side of the head, a little bit like a hammerhead shark. Dragonflies are far better flyers than the damselflies. Damselflies can't achieve the speeds and things and the change of direction that dragonflies can, but they're no slouch either. I consulted iNaturalist and discovered that there have been 29 species of damselflies reported there and 54 species of dragonflies for Loudoun County. Don't let that scare you. I'm not going to go over all, 83 of them. Dragonflies fall into two basic categories. The first one is the perchers, and those are the ones that you're probably most familiar with. They're the ones who are hanging out at the ponds for the most part. They perch because their legs are under their thorax in their position. They tend to hunt by sitting there and waiting for something to fly by. And then when they see it, they pop out and they grab it and they bring it back to where they were and chow down on it there. I'll be showing you a few examples of those, both skimmers and meadowhawks. The only pennant in this presentation is this handsome fellow here. He's a calico pennant. Pennants are very nicely named because they tend to hold on to pieces of grass and delicate things like that. Always on a windy day, it seems like, and they blow around like crazy. So I'm sure that's why they're called that. The other category is called flyers, and this is because they very seldom rest. They move around from place to place. They're patrolling all the time for mates and for meals. A lot of what they eat is very small. You'll often see them flying through clouds of mosquitoes or gnats and just munching them on the fly so they don't have to land with their prey. When they do land, they hang vertically, so they hold on above their heads. They also, much to my frustration, tend to do that in the tops of trees, far away from my camera. So it's very hard to actually get an identification. You just go, that looked interesting, and they're gone. Groups of those are the darners and the gliders. I have examples of them. This fellow here is a Swift River cruiser. He's the only example of a cruiser that I have in the presentation. So one of the most prevalent flyers in this area is the common green darner. And they are the precursors of spring in the area. They come in March. You start seeing them mating at the ponds. And they're interesting because they actually do migrate. The ones that come in March start mating then and putting their eggs in the ponds. And then the dragonflies from that emerge in August. And around November, they all gather into big swarms and head south. Those swarms can number in millions. And there was a bit of excitement in 2019 when the National Weather Service reported picking up clouds of dragonflies on their radar. And most of those, I think, were common green darners. This one was very cooperative and hovered for me. So I mentioned that when they get here, the thing that's on their mind is mating. The ones on the left are doing that. The male is using his cerci to hold on to the back of the female's head. And then the female, if she's amenable to mating with him, curls up like she is and completes what's called the mating wheel. And the amount of time that odonates spend in that position can vary from seconds to hours from species to species. Once they're done with that, it's time for the female to oviposit, to place her eggs in the water. A lot of odonates like to accompany her when she does that. They can be a little controlling that way, presumably because they don't want other males to mate with her before she's done with his eggs. So he'll hold on to her. In this case, he holds on to her through the entire process, and you'll see them flying in tandem over the pond. and landing every once in a while on vegetation like that so she can put the tip of her abdomen into the water and deposit her eggs. Another species in the area that you often see flying tandem is the black saddlebags. They can be seen in a lot of the areas around here, like the common green darners. They hang out in a lot of places together, flying over the ponds and over the meadows. They differ a little bit in how they oviposit because they never really land. Instead, the male lets go of the female and she drops down and touches the tip of her abdomen to the water. And then when she comes back up, he grabs hold of her again. So they do that all over the pond. It's actually kind of fun to watch. And the picture on the right, this one, I would consider these flyers, except he's actually perching. So they're in that little mid-ground. They don't like to be categorized too well. But they don't land for you very often, but when they do, you get a chance to see how beautiful the veining on that saddle is. They're really very handsome. Another example of ovipositing is this female common whitetail here. You can see she's just touched the surface of the water with her abdomen, and you can see the rings there that she's left. I've put an asterisk next to the name on this slide, and you'll see that on some other slides. That's to indicate that I've actually found these in my garden, because after all, we are here with the master gardeners. So yes, they show up in my garden. Usually it's the females, because the males of most dragonfly species spend their time, a great deal of their time, at the water, because they know that when the females are ready to mate, that they have to come to the water to do it. So they're waiting there. The females know that they're waiting there. So they don't go anywhere near there until they're ready. So that's, in that case, then you find them in the meadows, not too far from the water, but far enough away to be away from the males, and hanging out in your gardens sometimes. This species is also kind of interesting because the females and the males look a good bit different. They have different patterns on their wings. Also, the male has a powdery blue abdomen and part of his thorax. He's not that way when he's immature. He develops that through age. Over age, he turns pruinous, which means he builds up what's called pruinosity, a waxy substance on his abdomen. Many male dragonflies do this, and some females. I've seen some literature that says that pruinosity actually reflects into the ultraviolet quite nicely. And so probably they look really spectacular to themselves that way, and it helps them stake out their territory a little bit. All right, so we've talked about eggs. What happens after that? When the eggs hatch, the larvae then live in the water for anywhere from 1 month to, extreme cases, up to 8 years. In that form, they are growing and molting their exoskeleton as they do so, and eating. They eat a lot of mosquito larvae. So you want to attract dragonflies to any ponds you have nearby. They also eat worms, tadpoles, even small fish. As they get to the point where it's time to actually become a dragonfly, the dragonfly starts forming inside the exoskeleton. And when it's ready to emerge, the nymph crawls out of the water onto a rock or onto vegetation, and that exoskeleton splits and the dragonfly crawls out. At this point, the dragonfly is very vulnerable, and in this vulnerable state, he's called a teneral. This one, once it matures, is going to look almost nothing like that, not that bright green or anything, and the wings will become less shiny as they harden up. And I saw a good example of how vulnerable they are in this state. We were once at a pond where there were a lot of tendrils coming up, and there was a whole squadron of cedar waxwings nearby. I had no idea that they ate insects at all, but every time a dragonfly, a tendril one, started fluttering around, one would come zooming in and pluck it up. So, which was heartbreaking for me, but anyway. Once they leave, those exoskeletons are then just left. At that point, it's called an exuvia. And if you go down to ponds the right time of the summer, you sometimes see a whole bunch of those around. So you get an indication that an awful lot of dragonflies have come out at that time. In their adult stage, they sometimes only live about 3 weeks. Some of them, like the common green darners that fly south, live a good bit longer. So that tendril dragonfly that you saw in the last slide was a dragon hunter. This is what it looks like once it has dried out and firmed up. They're the biggest dragonfly in this area at 3.3 inches. Mostly you find them near rivers and streams. This one I found at a pond, so it's not a hard and fast rule. They're called dragon hunters, though, because for the most part, they eat other dragonflies. And they have really long legs on them for grabbing around them and catching them. These legs are so long that they are actually known to also eat hummingbirds, much to everybody's horror. I tried to verify that, and sure enough, found a picture of one with a hummingbird. Although the hummingbird looked like it had just been caught, so I do have a little trouble imagining how they managed to hold on to it. But anyway, this dragonfly also is what's known as a clubtail. This is a type of dragonfly that has a very long abdomen that gets broader at the tip. And they also tend to not be as colorful as some of the others. Another great hunter in our area is the eastern pondhawk. Pondhawks just devour everything in sight, it seems like. They take out an awful lot of damselflies wherever they are. They eat other dragonflies. They even eat other pondhawks. If it's a female or an immature male, you'll know a pondhawk when you see one because they're the only dragonflies in this area that are green. In fact, they're one of few on the entire planet that are green. With age, the males become pruinous, like the one on the left. They're also a little different from some of the others because their cerci are white. There aren't many dragonflies in this area that have white cerci. So you can sometimes, if you're having a little trouble telling one from the other, if you can spot those cerci, it's a pretty good chance that it's a pondhawk. These two have an asterisk by them because they show up every once in a while in my garden. Again, mostly the females, but sometimes the males as well. And here's an example of them eating bigger prey. The one on the left is eating a needle skimmer that's even bigger than it is. It should take it probably about 20 minutes to chew through that. The one on the right is eating a pollinator. He's caught a cabbage white butterfly. And you can see, if you look at that one, just how big the spines on his legs are. A dragonfly that you'll often see at the same ponds with the pondhawks is the blue dasher. These are pretty much my favorite. And that's because they love the camera. They sit in front of the camera and they stick their little abdomen up in the air and they've got those white faces and those pretty blue eyes. They're just adorable, absolutely adorable. When they first emerge, the males look a lot like the females and they turn pruinous with age. The females also become pruinous with time, but usually they're in their venerable old age at that point. The obelisking, which is the sticking the abdomen up in the air, is a behavior that seems to have two functions, really. Generally, it's recognized that it's used for thermoregulation. So they're out there at the pond, the sun is beating down, they're getting hot. In order to change the angle at which the sun is hitting them, they stick part of the body straight up in the air. It's the closest they can get to getting in the shade. The other use could be to as a sort of a display to other males to warn them from coming into their territory. But since nobody can read a dragonfly's mind, there's some debate as to what it's really for. Another dragonfly that bears a fairly strong resemblance to the blue dashers, but is actually quite a bit bigger, is the great blue skimmer. These are the ones that I really love for photography. The close-up pictures that I showed you earlier were both great blue skimmers. And that's because they're the ones that I can really, I don't want to say sneak up on. You can't sneak up on a dragonfly. They can see in all directions. But the great blue skimmers, they tend to fly away for a moment as you approach, and then they come right back. And then you can step a little further and they fly away for a moment and they come right back. Because remember, they're defending their territory. So they don't want to get scared off completely. So you can sometimes get within about a foot of them and get a really good photograph. And I think they're really photogenic with, again, the white face, and their eyes are just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. You don't find them at ponds quite so much. They're mostly in swampy areas. So places where water is gathered around the trees a lot. You'll sometimes find the females in the woods, a little distance from the water. These handsome fellows are widow skimmers. They're easy to identify in this area because they're the
Sorry, quick question. One person asked, what was their life cycle? How long is their life cycle? I don't know if it's the species you were just speaking about, or that's when the question came through. So
I actually don't know for each of the species, and it can vary a lot. A lot of the dragonflies, sometimes the eggs overwinter and the larvae hatch in the spring. Sometimes the larvae overwinter and then the dragonfly emerges the next year. In other cases, like a lot of them have two broods, like blue dashers, I think have two broods over the course of the summer. And the second brood is often a little bit smaller than the first brood because they're taking less time. They didn't overwinter. So they're growing up in the course of the summer. We're going to get in a few moments to one where I do know that their egg to adult time can vary anywhere from 2 months to 6 months, depending on the heat of the place where they are and the amount of food that's available. So it's a little dependent on all of that. And I hope that answers the question. All right, widow skimmers. The saddles on them are very unique in this area. They're the only ones that have black saddles on both sets of the wings. The males, when they first emerge, look an awful lot like the females, and they turn pruinous with age. So their body turns blue, and in extreme cases, almost black. But they also get pruinosity on the wings. So you get those lovely white patches there, which makes them really stand out at the pond. Another pond dragonfly here is the unicorn clubtail. They don't stand out quite so much. They're a little dull colored, but you'll find them right on the shores or on the logs at the side of ponds. And this is a clubtail, so you can see the abdomen is slender and then it gets fatter towards the end. But there's another clue that it's a clubtail that shows up very well in this picture, and that's that the eyes don't touch the top of the head. So that's a distinguishing feature for the clubtails. This one is obelisking, so unicorn clubtails are another one of those species that does that a lot. And they're also pretty distinctive because the cerci there at the end of the abdomen are really fat, and they form kind of a a sickle shape. So of all the clubtails that are out there, they're one of the most easily identifiable. And now we're up to the little sweetheart of the local dragonflies. Eastern amberwings are really cute. They're less than an inch in length. So they're about the size of a wasp. The female dragonflies make good use of this because they're actually wasp mimics. The coloration of their wings and all, they look an awful lot like a wasp. And so, of course, that makes it very handy that when they're hanging out in the garden, they're often mistaken for wasps, and the predators tend to leave them alone. Or at least I guess that's the reasoning. And I see the females in my garden fairly often. The males are like little jewels down at the pond, guarding their areas. Even their wings are orange. The entire dragonfly is orange. And when the sun shines on them, it goes through their wings and casts these amber shadows on the rocks around them and on the plants. So they're really kind of a little treat down by the waterside. And now I'm going to cheat a little bit. Roseate skimmers are not on probably any of the checklists of dragonflies in this area. They're considered a tropical dragonfly. That said, I have encountered them 3 times in Northern Virginia. The first time I encountered one, I was very excited because, look, it's pink. That's very exciting. I ran right to iNaturalist and entered it there and discovered that at that time I had registered the northernmost record for a roseate skimmer in the whole country. That didn't last very long. Other people started spotting them after that. And the second time I saw one, it was in the company of a female. And you're probably figuring out that the males start out looking a good bit like the females and then turn pruinous, but in this case, his pruinosity is pink. That got some people excited as well because there was one dragonfly enthusiast in the area who had a pet theory that roseate skimmers were reproducing in the area rather than them just being vagrants that got blown in with a storm. And the fact that I found a male and a female together supported that hypothesis. So, and after that, I saw a male again for a 3rd time. So maybe there's something to that. So if you're out around ponds in mid-September, which is always when I see them, I think it's always on the 15th of September that I see them, then keep your eyes open and you just might see a pink dragonfly. After September, the dragonfly season starts to wind down, and that's where the autumn meadowhawk is my friend, because they're here till about Thanksgiving or even till December. So I can see dragonflies in the fall. They're a little harder to see because meadowhawks aren't very big. They're, I don't know, 1.5 inches or so. And they're for the most part brown, but thankfully the male has that bright red abdomen that catches the sunlight. So when you see that little flash, you know to look a little closer. You can also spot them at the ponds in that time of year because they oviposit in tandem. And in their case, the male never lets go of the female. They drop down together so that her abdomen can touch the water. And the last dragonfly I'm going to talk about before we get onto the damselflies is the champion migrator of dragonflies. The wandering glider is on every continent except for Antarctica. They even have a colony in the Galapagos. They have been spotted 600 miles out at sea over ships on the ocean. So they get around. There's also a population of them that migrates around the Indian Ocean a distance of about 10,000 miles over the course of several generations. In this area, you'll see them over the ponds and the meadows. They're great for photography because they hover an awful lot, or they fly back and forth in the same plane so you can get the set distance from them focus on that plane as best you can and just take shots till you get a good one. I have seen them in parking lots when I come out from work. They seem to like parking lots an awful lot. I'll often see them too when I'm stopped at a stoplight and they're flying by. In the parking lots, the females have this funny behavior where they often oviposit on the windshields of cars. I guess mistaking them for water, even though they must be really hot. I have my own little hypothesis that their propensity for ovipositing in unusual places might be helping their spread, because, you know, if you oviposit on a freighter and that freighter heads out over the ocean, I can only help them get there, right? But who knows? All right, damselflies. I'm going to start with my favorite one, the great spreadwing. This is my favorite for a number of reasons. Back when I first started looking for dragonflies, I got a checklist of the dragonflies and damselflies of Loudoun County. And the very first time I went out with that checklist, I found a great spreadwing, which was not on the checklist. I got very excited, and since the checklist said, if you find anything that isn't on this checklist, please report it, I did so. And I got a reply from Kelly Sensor back then. That was kind of fun to reconnect. But the fact that I could report something and discover something that other people didn't know was really an awful lot of fun. And then on top of that, the very next time I went out, I found another one, this one, and took this picture. And I was so proud of it, I made a cover for my cell phone out of it. So I have a thing for great spreadwings. Great spreadwing is also my username on iNaturalist. So yeah, they're responsible for my interest in, or obsession with, dragonflies and damselflies. Later, a female one came and settled in my garden for 3 days. She was there, hiding out in the bee balm and eating gnats and mosquitoes. So I considered her kind of a good luck charm for a while there. I don't encounter them that often, and I've never seen them mating, and I've never seen them ovipositing. I recently discovered that one reason for that might be that they have a tendency to oviposit way up in the trees. And the eggs then usually overwinter and they hatch in the spring, and the larvae fall into the water from that point. So not every odonate necessarily lays its eggs in the water. Some of them lay them over the water. This one too is an example of a damselfly where the wings do not fold over the back. Also notice it's not perching, it's hanging down. This is a characteristic of the spreadwing class of dragonflies as a whole. One of the more interesting damselflies found in this area, and one of the smallest, is the citrine forktail. The first time I saw one of these, I didn't even know about citrine forktails, but I saw this little thread of yellow moving in the grass and looked closer, and son of a gun, it was a damselfly. Since then, I've learned to look for them, and we find them pretty often. They're interesting because they make their way into the darndest places. And I misspoke earlier, they're the ones who are in the Galapagos. The wandering gliders are on Easter Island. So switch that for a moment. They're the only odonate in the Galapagos. So somehow these little guys got there and nobody else has. There's also a population of them that was found in the Azores Islands in the Atlantic in 1940. And the funny thing about that population is there are no males. It's all females, and they lay eggs that no males fertilize, and female damselflies come out of those. So they're using a method of reproduction called parthenogenesis. I tried to read a paper on it, and all I can say is it was over my head, but it's kind kind of like cloning. The way that they get to these funny places, it's not entirely clear, but one time an airplane was flying at 1,000 feet, gathering samples up there for whatever reason. And among the other things that they found up there were citrine forktails, 1,000 feet up in the air. No other odonates were up there. So somehow they managed to get swept up by the winds and blown hither and yon and wind up in the darndest places. I usually find them in the grass a little ways from the water. They don't seem to make it to the water's edge very often. There's an entire genus of damselflies called bluets. Most of them are blue, not all of them, because that would make too much sense. But most of them are black and blue in various patterns and really hard to tell apart unless you can take a close-up photo and then flip through a book. And also, I'm not going to bore you with all the different types of bluets. Instead, we're going to have a stand-in here, the familiar bluet, which is here all summer long and into late October. They're really abundant at all the ponds in this area, and they can be kind of easy to spot because when they're ovipositing, they tend to congregate. It's like they've all decided this is a really good spot, and they all go there. So you can catch sight of them fairly easily that way. One of the more distinctive damselflies in the area is the ebony jewel wing. They're the only ones that have black wings. The females, the wings are a little more translucent, and they have the jewel on their wings, which is just a white stigma. You find those at a lot of the streams in this area. And it's not a matter of just the males being there, but you'll see the males and the females together at the water. The males, though, tend to fight for territory. So you can see this one, he's flapping his wings and he's moving his abdomen up and down, either to attract a female, but more likely as a show of aggression to a male that's in the area. They have a behavior that's called flights of attrition. Well, they'll get up and they'll flit around each other like crazy, and then they'll take off and they'll fly a distance until one of them gives up, and then the other one comes back and declares himself winner of the territory. They're also quite handsome because their bodies are metallic. They really shine in the sun. Then my favorite damselfly in the area is one that's also metallic, the American ruby spot. You can find them at bigger streams. So around this area, if you can get to the shore of Goose Creek to an area where there are emergent plants that are growing up out of the water, you're pretty much guaranteed to find some ruby spots there. I've also found them a lot along the C&O Canal. Both of them have metallic green abdomens. The males have red thoraxes and females have green thoraxes. Despite seeing them together at the shore, I've never seen them mating or ovipositing. Part of this might be because quite often the females actually submerge to oviposit. They'll go down 2 to 5 inches and put their eggs down at the base of the plants. During that time, the male stays above, watching over her, making sure no other males come along. And she can stay down there for up to an hour doing that. So they're pretty interesting. And with that, we're done covering the various species. So let me tell you where you can find them. My favorite spot is Clodmore Park, mostly for accessibility. If you park near the visitor centers there, you walk right out into fields where you'll see common green darners, wandering gliders, black saddlebags patrolling over the fields and the nearby meadows. As you approach the ponds, you'll see pretty much the whole host of the common pond dragonflies, the widow skimmers, the blue dashers, the pond hawks, and the familiar bluets are usually there in pretty big numbers. Then there are woods there. You can wander through the woods and find streams in the woods where there are often ebony jewel wings. And as you come out of the woods in some areas, there are gravel roads that the trees around them sort of form tunnels. And there are a lot of darners that like to patrol up and down those, catching the mosquitoes and things that are there. So it's a really good place to find dragonflies and damselflies of all kinds. Another favorite is Banshee Reeks Nature Preserve. Banshee Reeks used to be a farm, and it has rolling hills in it that are covered with meadows that have lots of pollinators and a fair number of dragonflies. There's a really good pond there. That's a wonderful place to see all the different pond dragonflies. In the fall, you're pretty much guaranteed to see autumn meadowhawks at that pond. But the real jewel there is if you walk from the pond towards Goose Creek, which just touches the border of the park. You start getting into a marshy area, and there are all kinds of interesting dragonflies there. Not generally in huge numbers, you just never know what's going to fly by. And I've got a lot of my life lister species there. Otherwise, the Sanctuary Trail at Algonquian is good. If you want to get to Goose Creek and look for American ruby spots, I recommend the River Point Drive Trailhead. If you're stomping around in Sweet Run State Park, try to swing by Gordon Pond for the dragonflies there. And Russ Nature Sanctuary, which is essentially in downtown Leesburg, has a very good dragonfly pond, and they're even kind enough to put up some billboards and things to tell you what the different species are that you should look for. And then don't forget to look for them in your garden and in the neighborhood, or flying overhead when you're parked at a stoplight. Other resources out there. I highly recommend, if you're interested in identifying dragonflies while you're out and about, Robert Blakeney's Guide to the Ones in Northern Virginia. It's slender. You don't have to leaf through a whole bunch that aren't in this area. It's very focused on what we see here. It does not have roseate skimmer stuff. If you want general information or more scientific information about dragonflies that's accessible to the layman, Dennis Paulson's Natural History book is outstanding. And it's also a really beautiful coffee table book. It's full of lots of gorgeous pictures. And then he too has a field guide that covers all the dragonflies and damselflies of the East and has a lot more information than Robert Blakeney's on their behaviors and things. If you're interested in how they fly and how they see and how they hunt, then that video, the YouTube video there, The Insane Biology of the Dragonfly, is a must watch. It's absolutely mind-blowing. If you've taken a picture of a dragonfly and you want to know what it is, you can go to inaturalist.org and enter it there, and they have an AI system that will take a stab at telling you what kind of a dragonfly it is. And if you post it there, then other dragonfly enthusiasts will then verify whether it is what you think it is. So, and that can be pretty addictive. That'll get you started taking pictures. And I already mentioned Odonata Central as a good place for information on sightings of dragonflies. And another good site with information is the site by Michael Moore, who's a local dragonfly expert. He's out on the Delmarva Peninsula. And he's also like the motivating force behind the establishment of Odonata Central. And he's one of the primary identifiers of dragonflies on inaturalist.org. So that man knows what he's talking about. And that's it. So I'm open to questions at this point.
Awesome. And I have one right now. There's a question: does Bless Park still have a dragonfly population?
Yes. Yes, it does. Actually, it does. I haven't been there. Last time I was there, I did go last year. Mostly what I found there was pond hawks caught in the webs of the garden spiders. That was
Oh,
a little something, but yes, they still have a good dragonfly population as well.
Circle of Life. Yeah, that was one of my first walks in Loudoun was there, but that was many, many moons ago. So I'll have to go back. I love the resource list. I may ask you to send that so I can include it with the video if folks are interested.
Oh, sure.
Or I can send it out to folks that are logged in here. You've shown a lot of lovely photos. Could you speak a little bit to some of the equipment that you use when you're taking your photos?
Sure.
Thank you.
People always seem to want to know. So I did throw in a slide about that. I got started actually using a Nikon Fluepix 900, which is a point and click camera with a really good zoom on it. At some point, I got tired of that one because it was really hard to do manual focus with it. And I wanted a slightly better resolution, but still it was a fabulous camera. Now I use a Nikon D7200, which has a DX format for those who know what that is. And I have two lenses that I use. Both of them are automatic focus and have stabilization technology in them. So I have a bit of a tremor. So when I hold a camera, it tends to go like this. So it's helpful to have a lens that accounts for that. The 300 millimeter one is really great because I can focus on things that are only about a foot away. So I can sneak up on the dragonflies, and it's better for getting the damselflies in particular because they're often down in the grass and you need to get close and get around them and whatnot. I did splurge and get a 600 millimeter, so that one has a pretty good zoom on it. And it's also very heavy, so combined with the camera, that's about 6 pounds of equipment that I'm holding up. But it's really great for getting pictures of the darners and things that land up in the trees or that are landing, halfway across a meadow. And I can't go wading through all the poison ivy to get that picture. I also touch up the pictures using Adobe Lightroom Classic, and I invested in some software from Topaz Labs that takes out the noise in the pictures. Particularly if the light is bad, you get a lot of noise in the pictures, and that sharpen them up just a little bit. So you may notice a lot of the pictures look really crisp. They didn't necessarily come out of the camera that way. The denoise capability is really great for getting that crispness there.
No, that's wonderful. I want to let folks know if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat, as some of you already have, and I will relay them to Lindsay. Lindsay, I did want to let you know, shout out to the Lansdowne Heights Memory Care Group. There's a whole group of residents there tuned in tonight. So
nice.
For letting us know that.
Yeah.
I don't know. We often don't know how many people, if it's one person logged in or if it's a whole group of people. So that was a nice thing to hear. So I just wanted to pass that along. And folks, definitely, if you have any other questions, I know I learned a lot. I was scribbling down some notes, but I certainly know that I'll have to rewatch it and capture more, because I absolutely learned some new things tonight. So thank you so much, Lindsay. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Anything else you would like to? Oh, here's a question. Sorry. What ways can you attract dragonflies to one's yard? So if you were going to attract dragonflies, I mean, I imagine having perhaps a water feature or maybe like places where they can perch, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, common wisdom is that if you can put in a water feature, typically a pond, you want to have vegetation around it, some of that vegetation growing out of the water, and some of it hanging over the water if possible. Your neighbors might start to hate you then because they're going to think you're attracting mosquitoes at that point. But if you can get dragonflies in there, then they're going to be eating the mosquitoes. So that's what's going to bring them. There are some, though, that like moving water. So if you would put in something that had moving water, they might be attracted to that. But they also have to eat. So my experience too, I don't get tons of dragonflies in my garden, but they do visit because I've been planting native plants and have a pollinator garden out front. So I have a lot of bees and and butterflies, and the occasional dragonfly shows up. So anything that gives them food or a place to breed would do the trick.
Thank you. I noticed you mentioned the amberwings earlier. I definitely see those too in my garden, among others. But yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions right now, and we're almost at our hour. But again, this has been wonderful. And for those of you who didn't hear me earlier, this session is being recorded, and we will put it up on the Loudoun County Public Library YouTube channel, hopefully tomorrow. But at the latest by Monday next week. So keep an eye out for it there if you'd like to rewatch or let others know about it. Let's see. What plants do they lay eggs on is a question. Yeah.
It varies from species to species. A lot of them just drop the eggs right in the water. I've even seen photos of females dropping the eggs from a great height, and somebody managed to catch a picture, and you can see this little egg, you know, falling down. There's a species of spreadwing called a sweet flag spreadwing that I've seen in Maryland, where the female has a little, almost like a knife among her cerci at the end of her abdomen. And she cuts a slit in the plants and tucks the egg into there. And it seems to be a specific plant that I see them on over and over again. So that's going to vary from species to species, I think, as to what their favorite plants are for that. The American ruby spots, I can never remember the name of the plant. I know my boyfriend often comments that we see emergent vegetation, but there's a specific plant that if you see that one, that pretty much guarantees that there's going to be ruby spots there. And I don't remember what the name of that is. But so it varies as they go. For some of them, they're just hanging out on whatever's on top of the water and putting their eggs in the water. So.
Okay. I have a question. It's a mating question. One of our attendees had heard that eyes can be damaged because of the grip, I guess, when they're mating. Yeah. And she wondered if that was true.
Yes, that's true. The males, it's only dragonflies where that's true. Damselflies, their cerci are a little different, and they actually grab the female by the front of the thorax, but dragonflies grab them by the back of the head, and you can see it right there in that picture. And they grab so hard that they actually can puncture the eyes when they do that. Presumably that doesn't hurt her. But yeah, it does leave a mark.
The person who asked says, thank you. Awesome. All right. Well, again, I appreciate everyone being here. Lindsay, I appreciate your time. And I just want to wish everyone a wonderful evening, and thank you for spending.
I appreciate everybody's interest. So thank you very much for having me.